All right, today we are going to take a look at Baroque art from the Baroque period. Before we get going into the unit today, let's take a look at the assignment that you're going to have due. um, you're going to select one of the works of art as we go through the unit here. Identify the stylistic element characteristic of the Baroque period. You're going to be looking for things like dramatic lighting, a return to sort of the normal compositions where we have the focal point back where it belongs, and the use of space similar to what we saw before mannerism. Um, we're going to be looking at the grand nature, a very dramatic and theatrical sort of use of art. That means in architecture, deep uses of sculpture and trying to tell a story maybe in those architectural spaces, even more so than they've done previously. Explain how the technique you're going to identify is supported by the artist's visual depiction of the story within the work of art. And so, as we go through the unit, I'll mention a couple in particular I think you should probably focus on and a couple of different styles. So just pay attention and it should go really easy. From the home page, you can get into the module. It is right here, Baroque art. And specifically, we're, Italian and Spanish Baroque, but it's also going to be what's going on in France, Sweden, kind of everywhere in Europe. The term Baroque comes from the Portuguese word word barroco, meaning rough or irregular, and was actually used to describe things that weren't perfect. And so there was a reflection back immediately after the Baroque period. People kind of look back going, yeah, no, we don't like that so much. Looks kind of weird. Um, uh, we now recognize it as a remarkable period in art and important as we progress into neoclassicism and all kinds of good stuff coming up. There were changes in Europe during this time. You had the end of the 30-Year War, which was this period of turmoil, kind of a war between Catholicism, Protestants, Habsburgs, and I don't know. I forget what the other. I guess more like the French versus the Catholics in some respects. But in any event, the end of the 30-Year War comes with this treaty, or the peace comes through the Treaty of Westphal. Is it Westphal? Westphalia. I'll bet it says it right here. Here I'm trying to remember things from memory from. But yeah, with the Treaty of Westphalia, we sort of see the boundaries of modern Europe being roughly defined. It'll change, obviously, over time, but with sort of the structure that we see today, an understanding of sort of where the boundaries of Catholicism, Protestant kind of the wars continued far after. I think it's funny that we call it the end of the 30 Years' War and beginning of the next 6 years' wars. In religion, it kind of brought an end to this conflict, though, within the church itself. And academia, early 7th century saw the widespread acceptance of heliocentrism. Thank you so much, Galileo. Now we know the sun is at the center of everything and not the earth. In economics, we see an expansion of the global market. Particularly in Europe and Asia, you see exchanges in the marketplace that make for an exchange, a cultural exchange, really, that becomes an influence within the art itself. So during the lesson, you're going to be looking at how the European economic, religious, educational, political context defined the beginning of the Baroque period, as well as how the Baroque artists combined real and illusionary qualities to physically and emotionally involve the viewer. And so one of the things, one of the hallmarks, again, we talk about the dramas, really kind of trying to bring the viewer in to the story. And so when we look at the architecture of the time, still sort of reflective of that Greek and Roman, we see the pediment at the top, we see the columns there being used in arches over the doorways. Again, when we look at neoclassicism coming up, it's the influences of Greek and Roman architecture are continuing throughout. And so what we see is different is a bolder use of the sculpture, with the three dimensionality of it. You can see these recesses here where we have sculptures kind of built in. This is the the facade of Santa Susana. Um, and there's an emphasis towards the verticality, trying to emphasize that upward movement, but also towards the central point, the axis of the architecture. And so those are sort of hallmarks of Baroque architecture, but uh, we're talking 1,000 years, not even really when it's related to architecture, and so not a whole lot changes. We're looking again at that increased use of sculptures. What Not just the sculpture, but using these facades again to kind of tell a story. Here we see these deep recesses again. Some of them are entryways, but again, others like these here on the side likely held at one time sculptures and these as well, these recesses across the top. But this is the facade of St. Peter's. Again, this was changed later. This was not the original design. There were portions added to it. And so the Baroque kind of wraps around what was there previously. And so a lot of the architecture that we see is a development and a change of what was there already before. So as we look at Greek to Roman to the Baroque to the neoclassical, all these things, some are one of the reasons a lot of the influences sort of stay the same is because those are the same structures very often being repeated or similar structures. The colonnade kind of highlights this symmetrical design. It's almost like these are big arms hugging this central column here. If you look columns around the outside, again, Greek Roman influences. It's a hugely ambitious project. I think it's enormous. Two semicircle colonnades comprise of 4 rows of massive Tuscan columns and ending in a classical temple in the front. This is in dramatic Baroque fashion. Again, the emphasis on drama, the emphasis on really trying to be kind of overpowering the viewer. The encircling colonnades symbolically serve as embracing arms of the church, welcoming pilgrims to the seat of Catholicism. And so this was designed, constructed by Bernini, Gian Bernini. When we look at his influences throughout, we're going to kind of recognize, again, a lot of what we're looking at through the Baroque period is the influence of those Italian masters, the Renaissance masters, Michelangelo, Donatello, all these, all the Teenage Ninja Turtles. Bernini was also responsible for decorating much of the interior of the St. Peter's, and when we look at how his work kind of moves beyond what we saw at the end of that High Renaissance, we see this again, real dramatic, using this vertical to create these high figures, these angels looking up above, and it's a very imposing sort of thing. There's a lot of storytelling going on in all of the areas of these arches and all these domes as well. Ornate, we see lots again gilding, the bronze, gold. Again, this canopy stands over 100 feet over the main altar, again emphasizing that enormity. When lit, this gold reflects around, it becomes this gorgeous light that again sort of silhouettes this enormous structure that dominates the central space. It's also decorated with numerous bees, symbols of the Barberini family. Pope Urban VII. Get my my Roman numerals together. The sponsor of the project. All right, we're going to look next at sort of sculpturally how we saw the beginning of that sculpture in the round. I can't remember the title of the last one we looked at, but the last couple sculptures we looked at from the last High Renaissance really start taking a look at sculpture in a three dimensionality. And when we looked at a lot of the Davids and the sculpture that were done in the earlier Renaissance, they were still designed to be put in these recesses or seen from a single point of view. Sculpture around encouraged a three dimensionality that this was going to sit in a center of a space and be seen from all angles or from multiple angles. And so one of the things we see in Baroque was not only were they paying attention that this was going to be seen in a three dimensionality, but that from certain positions, really, we were going to increase the dramatic composition or the story that was being told. And so this is a depiction of David, much like we've seen the other Davids before. This is very different. David's not just standing there with a rock in his hand. He's in motion. He's active, and again, it kind of creates that drama. It's that storytelling, and this is that Baroque influence, that drama. And again, we're going to look back to proportionalities, right? We're not, when we look at mannerism, we saw that distorted proportions, the elongated necks, and all that weird stuff going on. We've got to return to that classical naturalism and realism, and that humanistic. Again, we see, that this twist and this turn and the muscle structures and so forth. A very humanistic sort of representation of David, frozen in time. When we look at the rape of Proserpina, again, looking at it from multiple angles, it's designed to be seen sort of in different aspects of the same story being told. From one angle, you see more of the energy of him kind of taking her, while from another, it's more of that, resolve that she's been captured, if you will. And so, looking at how the artist designed the sculptures to be seen, not just again in that full round and in the round, but also to be recognized that in specific areas you were going to see sort of a different aspect of that dramatic story. Looking at the theatrical that could be created in sculpture, if you will. That's going to be one of the hallmarks of Baroque. So think about how you might choose a work of art and how you might describe how it relates to Baroque. And so you can use all these words like showing the drama, showing the theatrical nature. A return to the balance, and the composition. Again, we see the proportions of the human figure are back to where they should be, and we see that composition where now the central action is back to being our focal point. And if you remember in modernism, we saw the mannerism, I should say, we saw that void space, and they kind of avoided putting things in the focal point, and that's really strange. But then we don't ever return. When we look at the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, this one's really nice. I love this because it's not really designed to be seen in the three-dimensionality, in the round, if you will. It's more kind of reflective of that earlier Renaissance, as far as we've got these big gold pieces that become a background. So what we see again is the use of sculpture to tell this story, to create this, like the gold in that canopy sort of created in the arches and in the domes, created that gorgeous light that silhouetted that large structure in the center of the altar and the church. We see here this beautiful altarpiece. The fact that it's done in this white, silhouetted sort of by this dark behind, and then the light, by having this sort of darker space behind, when that gold, and particularly when it was first gilded, first polished, probably lit up like light, and you would see these rays kind of drenching down on that sculpture. Again, it emphasized that drama, the religious drama, again, that defined that Baroque art. All right. Specifically, you can talk about cascading drapery. I love how they talk about that. As it reveals the celestial light within the niche over the altar. That sounds much better than the way I said it. I should have just read it. The architectural and decorative elements are married to convey the experience to the viewer. So again, that Baroque is trying to bring that viewer in and kind of wrap the story around the viewer, if you will. Borromini, sort of a rival of Bernini's. When we look again at at sculpture, how the sculpture is reflective of that Baroque period, we see the strong use of that sculptural aspects, even here that three dimensionality. But still, we see the columns that reflect that Greek and Roman influences. What's kind of new and different, and again, kind of harkens back to that drama, and is this sort of fluidity, this movement that's sort of created by the almost wave line created. These curved elements. It pulsates. I love the way they put stuff. I should just read it. Chapel of Saint Ivo. I'm not really sure how that one's pronounced. Example of unification structure and sculpture. And so again, just recognize that when we look at Baroque architecture, we're looking at Baroque sculpture, and that's kind of the hallmark of how we're gonna recognize. If you look at something, you go, "Gosh, there's a lot." They want to look crazy with the sculpture. That must be Baroque. Caravaggio was one of my favorite artists because he was kind of the great master. That's why he didn't get to be the fame and acclaim really is he kind of broke with the tradition. And what we recognize as the hallmark of Caravaggio's work is this rich use of dark shadow. Everything he did has this very dark space, and then the light creates the environment out of that dark space. And so when we look through the history of art, when you recognize, man, that is I love. We look at some of the other pieces as well. Two figures on the left concerned with counting the money. I'm not really concerned with you recognizing all the activity going on, but recognize that this lighting by nature is dramatic. Drama needs to be one of the words that you use. Theatrical, telling the story, something like that. These are the hallmarks of that Baroque period. And so think about the storytelling nature of this work. Obviously, this person is doing something that the other people are very interested in. They're kind of engaged. And again, that kind of engages the audience. Caravaggio's natures, and we're going to look ahead a couple. But when we look at the composition, again, we've gotten away from that weird compositions that they had, and a return to sort of not just a traditional sort of composition. We're looking at how he's using perspective here in a dramatic way. He's really emphasizing. We talked about how through the late, middle, and the high Renaissance, we see all these advancements towards that understanding of perspective, interpreting perspective. He's just kind of using the perspective here as a side note. Oh, by the way, look at how awesome I am at perspective. And it creates this dramatic sort of perspective within this composition. And that leads us into that horse. And again, this all kind of bleeds out of this dark space that he's created, and all adding to the drama. The foreshortening is what they're talking about here, that perspective. And so, it's just such a naturalistic use that a lot of what we saw before was a demonstration of, look, this is what perspective looks like. He's just kind of past that. If we compare this to the Christ being held, when we look at the mannerism, and Christ's body was all contorted and strange because the mannerists used that weird twists of movement and the strange elongation of the body. All that's gone. We've got a very unique, a very strong return to that naturalism, to the realism. But what Caravaggio brings again is that use of that rich, dark, and like that dramatic lighting that creates the impression that these figures are coming out of this space. And he's not, we looked at how very often the backgrounds were indicative of the style of what was going on. Whether they were brightly colored or if they were just gold leaf. This is about telling that story. So removed in Caravaggio's painting is sort of that need to tell what was going on in the beyond that story, focusing on the scene. We look here at one of his contemporary, someone he worked with and sort of studied from. And again, his influence continues really all through. We're gonna see that rich use, and we talked about chiaroscuro use, that use of light to dark to show those transitions. He really pushes the max, emphasizes both the highlights and the dark at the well as well. Karachi. Again, when we look at the interior architecture of Baroque, even more so than Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, even more so than we saw in any of the previous cathedrals. Storytelling. Every panel has something packed on it. Fresco here, fresco there, everywhere fresco. And so just recognizing that, again, the hallmark of this was that dramatic and theatrical. When you came into these spaces, you were sort of overwhelmed by all the different scenes and the different stories being told. And you could really sort of follow along as if you were reading a book. Detail of Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne. Should really practice up on my pronunciation. Is entirely classical. When we look at that classical design, again, we're putting on that singular plane. Again, we can see that there is a harkening back to that classical horizon line with the distinction of our sky and our grass that's pretty much on a single plane. We see that use of single point perspective, things in the distance kind of getting smaller as they go back, but also a centralized focal point area of emphasis. All of this, these designs moving horizontally and back into this space here, and I should say back into this central location here. And so, again, return to that classical composition, naturalism, and again, away from all that silliness that we saw in the Mannerist. Pozo, again, a real dramatic use of lighting, three-dimensional perspective. Look at the depth that's created. You can almost and feel like you're falling into this space. This is the illusionistic continuation of the church's architecture to reinforce the idea that the roof's been lifted away and the heavens are opening up, and so everything's awaiting. You can go into this space. And so dramatic. Again, every slide has had the word drama on it, theatrical. We can't say it enough. This is a great piece that you might choose to say, hey, look how dramatic this is. It makes use of the space. It opens it up, tells a story. Look how many people and figures are going on in it. It's very Baroque because it's got a lot of energy, motion, dramatic, theatrical, telling story. That was from Fra Pozzo. Choose a painting, choose a work of art, make sure you're jotting down a note so you can get that assignment done quick and easy when you get down here. Spain had become the largest, most powerful nation in the world during the 16th century, but power and prestige were lost in the 7th century. Despite this, King Philip III and IV were patrons of the arts and contributed to the development of Baroque within the region. And kind of remember that even at the end of the 30-Year War, art is almost exclusively dictated by the church. I mean, you have some patrons here and there that are paying, but most of the art is still going to be very religious related because it's going to be the Pope paying for it. Jose Ribera served as link between the Spanish and the Italian painting. He immigrated to Naples, and then a Spanish possession in 1616, and martyrdom of Saint Bartholomew. Ribera portrays the saint being hoisted up just moments before the terrible death, before he was skinned alive. And again, we look at that sort of influences of Caravaggio, that rich dark that's happening sort of underneath, and as this figure almost sort of kind of grows out of that. We look at the brushwork, but the use of the blue sky, I think, is one of the things that I recognize as being sort of indicative of the style. not smooth, but we see that almost textural surface. They call it scratchy. I don't really like the term scratchy there, but it's sort of this textural aspect to the way even this blue sky is being portrayed. Diego Velázquez is considered the greatest painter of Spanish Baroque, serves as the official painter for Philip IV, and attained the position of Chamberlain in the King's Court. And again, we see influences of the Caravaggio, the dark to the light, historical paintings. He told the stories and all, and I don't want to race through, but I'm anxious to get to my favorite one here of his. The Dutch broke free of Spanish control in the 16th century. Conflicts along the border between the Dutch and the controlled northern portion of the Netherlands and the Spanish-controlled south continued. Philip IV ordered his general Ambrosia de Spinola to reclaim the border fortress town of Breda. And along the siege, they're telling the stories really through not just this, but lots of different artists were kind of. In modern days, we have newspapers and so forth that tell the stories of what was happening. This was kind of history's way of recording, historical events, and so recognized not only for a remarkable painter, but sort of a historian that's capturing these moments in time. And oops, almost completely went past the one I wanted to show you most. Oh, go back. Yes. Las Meninas. And so this one is really neat and important for a couple of reasons. If we look at compositionally, you can barely see it, but in the reflection are the king and the queen, who are the subject matter. And we see the artist here behind this enormous canvas and all the other people in the room that are just there kind of preparing to be involved in the scene. But the way he has composed this scene is incredibly unique and demonstrates a perspective that really artists hadn't shown now up until now. Even though we've had movement towards naturalism, movement towards realism, it's all been from a single point perspective, if you will, where we're kind of looking at something that's being told, story that's been told. Here we're getting to see as the artist captures the story, and so it's like we're being ignored completely. And the only way we recognize that there's a queen and a king and queen even in this is the reflection we see in the mirrors, which happen to be centrally located, which also happen to be where our eyes directed this entire time, even though all of the action is sort of kind of going on around and has nothing to do with the king and queen. So there's a real uniqueness to this use of this focal point and how he's created it, and that is a break and an innovation that we really hadn't seen appreciated previously. All right, so your assignment is to complete all tasks and read the outlines in the lesson. Or just watch this. Select one artwork from the lesson. Identify the stylistic element characteristic of the Baroque period. Think about drama. Think about theatrical. Think about the lighting. Think about how it was told a story. If you're talking about architecture, don't forget to mention sculpture. Think about how Baroque is reflected in the specific piece you choose. We talked about at least 6 that you could easily identify and make 2 or 3 sentences about. So this shouldn't be hard. Hopefully you won't have trouble with it. Thanks for coming along and participating. Have a great day.